Hello and welcome into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on Tuesday, August 13th, to bring you guys another list of NFL topics and the latest headlines across the league. Some of the biggest news that we're going to talk about today actually broke yesterday. The Haason Reddick situation, him requesting a trade from the New York Jets to potentially move on after just basically getting there this offseason. We're going to go into that and the reasons why Haason Reddick is now looking to be traded. And also, continuing on with our series, the biggest questions that we have for the AFC North in this episode of today's show. Continuing on the series, like I mentioned, the AFC North, we're going to be looking at the Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers, and the Baltimore Ravens on what sort of issues they still have to figure out heading into 2024. Those topics and more coming down the line as we go through this show. But before I dive into all of what's going on with the Haason Reddick deal, I got the usual tip and donations opportunity that you guys are able to use with this show. If you guys got any questions that you want to make during the show, we want to hear it. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and insights. So whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion you just have to share on today's show, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat box. Also, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and it gets featured on today's show, there's an easy way to do that. Use the super chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the super chat button at the bottom of your screen, and let's keep this show as interactive and exciting as possible. But if you do prefer an alternative to the super chat button, you could also go to the gsmcpodcast.net link to tip and donate and leave a comment or question there if you prefer. So we couldn't do this show without you guys and your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. We always appreciate it whenever you guys are able to use that super chat button or the tip and donations link as well. But now I'm able to go into this Haason Reddick situation, right? This mess, honestly, this big mess that it has just become over the last months now, because it has been months since this trade happened. I want to say it happened at the start of April, if my memory serves me right. And now yesterday afternoon, according to multiple reports and multiple sources around this situation, Haason Reddick went to the New York Jets and requested a trade to happen. Now that, there's still this standoff with the contract dispute between Reddick and the New York Jets after just 4 months of technically being on the New York Jets, but are you actually on the team if you haven't stepped foot there and really practiced or done anything? I probably wouldn't say so, but it has been 4 months technically since that last trade with the Eagles has gone through. So everyone's been waiting to see Haason Reddick, join this team. Everyone's been waiting for this New York Jets team to get all their pieces together and really start building for a very high-pressured 2024 where they have all the pieces, it seems, on hand. Now they just need to go out there and perform. But Haason Reddick has been, holding out this entire offseason in order to get that contract extension that he has been looking for from the Philadelphia Eagles. That didn't work out, so obviously he was traded here. He is in the last year of his deal with that contract extension that the Philadelphia Eagles gave him. But the issue that starts to develop now, it came from Haason Reddick's father and just him transferring some information over to ESPN, or I should say through ESPN, that the idea with Reddick and how he feels about his contract is that Haason Reddick's father told ESPN that his son has outperformed his current deal and that they're both now looking for market value to kind of, find that value for Haason Reddick over the last couple of years that he has performed at a very good level, to be fair to him. So right now, Haason Reddick is due to make around $14 to $15 million on that last year of his current contract, and the market value right now stands at about $10 million more, at around $25 to $28 million for some of the highest earning pass rushers. So Haason Reddick logically would want to be making at least close to that, right? $10 million is a huge difference into what he brings to the table compared to other guys that sort of fill in the space between what he's making and the market value right now. So he's just trying to get compensated logically for what he feels that he has deserved based on his production. And based on that production, that's what the New York Jets, were sort of intrigued by, obviously, right? You look at him, 29 years old, a Pro Bowler each of the last 2 years. He was an All-Pro in 2022, and he recorded 27 sacks over the last 2 years. So, pretty impressive numbers, and that's why the New York Jets wanted a player like him to join their defense. Already a good defense, but adding Haason Reddick just really makes this team, one, very relentless at the point of attack. Up front, you have Quinnen Williams, Jermaine Johnson. If you add someone, Javon Kinlaw as well, if you add someone like Haason Reddick to that team, built as it is just on the front line, it becomes a much different perspective on how you game plan around those guys just up front, and then you have to account for not throwing it anywhere near Sauce Gardner. You have C.J. Mosley in the middle with Quincy Williams, also a young up-and-coming linebacker. Their defense is looking good. Haason Reddick was supposed to be a major contributor to that, but we haven't seen it just yet. And now, because of this contract dispute, clearly the Jets aren't feeling any way trying to get a contract extension to Haason Reddick before he joins them. That seems to be the problem, and that's where we get this trade request now from Haason Reddick, almost seeing the writing on the wall and anticipating that nothing's going to get done, so why should he just wait around, and he'll try to be proactive and get something done, and maybe, just change teams if they don't want to give him the contract that he's after. But just about an hour after Haason Reddick requested this trade, the New York Jets and their general manager, Joe Douglas, came out with a statement in which it read basically that they weren't going to trade him. Joe Douglas made that pretty clear in this statement. As you guys can see, he said, "We have informed Haason that we will not trade him, that he is expected to be here with his teammates, and that he will continue to be fined per the CBA if he does not report." And he said other things along that, but that was really the main message with Joe Douglas, basically ruling out any trade at this point for Haason Reddick, and you'd expect that to be the answer, but right now, why is this taking so long, right? Why? That's the main question. What is going on with the Jets that they don't want to offer him a contract, or what is Haason Reddick doing that, makes the Jets not want to offer him a contract, right? Because if you know the guy's coming into your building, if you're going to agree to a trade with the Philadelphia Eagles, and you know that he's on the last year of his deal, and you sort of also have the inclination that this was going to be a problem with the Philadelphia Eagles as to why they were trying to trade him, you would have thought that one of the first things the Jets did was sort of agree to any sort of compromise with this contract situation before they finalized the trade, or if they did finalize the trade without announcing a contract extension, very similarly to what's going on with Brandon Aiyuk right now, you would at least think that they have a good understanding, a good line of communication, and trust each other well enough to know that, hey, the contract's not going to get done right now, but we're going to trade for you, and something's going to be figured out to make both parties happy. But pretty much the opposite has happened. Either there was not enough communication, or someone is not, holding up their end of the bargain, or just someone's not telling the truth, because really what this whole thing boils down to is that initially, according to reports, the New York Jets were willing to continue the contract talks during the offseason and were willing to rework Haason Reddick's last year of his contract right now, at least make it all guaranteed, ideally, and then figure out a way to work out a long-term extension during the regular season. That was the Jets' mind frame, or the Jets' mindset in going into these discussions with Haason Reddick. But what Haason Reddick pretty much is evidently doing, he wanted it the other way around. He didn't want to show up yet until that contract was figured out first and foremost, and it seems like the Jets thought it was going to be one way. Haason Reddick clearly thinks it's going to be another way, and neither side is willing to budge at this moment onto whether or not they're going to figure out this contract at the end of the day. And right now, it seems, it's just a way to apply more pressure. Obviously, teams do this, or not teams, players do this more often than not. Once they get to a point where, all right, we have to change something, we got to get the Jets to feel more urgent about this. Brandon Aiyuk did it. Debo did it at his point in time. Now Haason Reddick is doing it as well. this offseason also, I want to say Trey Hendrickson did it. T. Higgins also did it. It's not an uncommon thing to mention it to your team that you want to be traded, to up the ante a little bit more and figure out a contract, or you want to leave, essentially. So really it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't move anything too much if the Jets are still relinquent to not figure out a contract extension at this point in time, and they're not willing to listen to any trade offers. Nothing's really going to move at this point in time. So at this point, if they truly value him as a major contributor, you kind of have to swallow your pride here a little bit, kind of just take a hit to your ego and just tell Haason, all right, let's just figure this out, because the amount of pressure and eyeballs already on the Jets over just from the time that this request was sent in by Haason Reddick to now, I'm sure you guys have seen it all over the national media, that everyone's sort of like clowning the New York Jets and just pointing the finger at them, which they do take up most of the blame. But if it is true that Haason Reddick told them something at one point and that it didn't end up happening the way that they sort of figured it out to be, then I could sort of understand from the point of the New York Jets that, hey, we had this agreed at this point in time, and now you're not holding up your end of the bargain. We're not going to budge now just because you're kind of making us seem like the bad guy. I can understand it that way, but really, when it all comes down to it, this Jets team, this year 2020 of their franchise, just from the time that they last made the playoffs to how bad that they've been over the last few years, you don't have any time really to stand up on your high horse and be like who are you to talk to us like this, the New York Jets? We're not going to budge to you and trying to make our team better. I think that all of that sort of nonsense should just be thrown out the window. Yeah, maybe you relinquish some sort of power by just caving in to what Haason Reddick wants, but he's going to make this football team better. Honestly, there's no shame in just, coming to the negotiating table and thinking with Haason Reddick, talking it out and being like, all right, if this is what it's going to take, let's just do it. You kind of have to be the bigger man here if you're the Jets, and just know that he's going to help your team. And it is in the best interest for everybody, your team, and what you've already built so much and stockpiled so much into this year, that you're just going to have to figure it out sooner rather than later, because you can't have this drag on. It serves no purpose to have Haason Reddick just sitting there and knowing that he could be willing to play if you're just able to meet his demands with his contract. So right now, really it doesn't move too much, but I think it says a lot to try to apply more pressure to the Jets to get this done, because really they're going to be the biggest losers if they don't have him on their team and they're not really producing on the defensive side of the ball as much as they could do, that they're just going to be seen as still the bad guy if they just have Haason Reddick there and still they're not willing to negotiate anything with him. But that's pretty much where it stands. It was breaking news, obviously, because it's so unprecedented to just request another trade after you've been traded there over the last 4 months. We'll see what the New York Jets do about it, applying more pressure to this team, knowing with how much is riding on this upcoming year. I think they'll figure something out. We're getting closer to the regular season. They have a big matchup against the 49ers in week 1, so they're going to need a guy like Haason getting to potentially Brock Purdy and trying to beat a guy potentially like Trent Williams on that offensive line. So they're going to need everybody that is at their disposal, and this sort of nonsense shouldn't really be getting in the way in the grand scheme of things. But that's how I feel about it. Those are my thoughts on it, on Haason Reddick requesting a trade from the New York Jets. Leave your guys' real opinion on where you guys see this situation going after this latest development in this story. But with that being said, we're going to head to our first break of the show, and when we return, continuing our series on the AFC North and seeing what are the biggest questions remaining for all the teams that make up this division. I'll give my thoughts and some potential solutions to each of these questions when we return after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant, I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now on the show to talk about some AFC North teams and some of the biggest questions still remaining for each of these teams. We're going to go through the Browns, the Bengals, the Steelers, and the Baltimore Ravens to discuss what they have to figure out, some of their more burning questions that is on the mind of a lot of people, I would say, and how they try to figure that out heading into 2024. Starting none other than with the Cincinnati Bengals here. A question that I had surrounding them, basically, with a lot of positives going their way, with Joe Burrow mainly being the biggest one, you assume that they're going to get back to their old selves. They're going to get back to, competing for AFC conference championships and winning potentially the AFC North with how competitive it all is. Having one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL is certainly just going to change the entire dynamic. But one thing that I still had my doubts about was who was going to be their starting defensive back duo. Obviously, it's a big part of it because you look at who's in their division, just the receivers that you go down the line that you're going to face, and also in combination with the quarterbacks that have throwing them the ball. It is an important thing. You think of Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, George Pickens, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy now coming in. A lot of just in your division is very stacked up, and not to mention everybody else across the conference. It is something that I feel like the Bengals haven't really addressed too much, especially after letting go of Chidobe Awuzie in this offseason, meaning that their defensive back room already was getting low, so much so that they were thinking of converting their safety that they drafted out of Michigan, Dax Hill. He is being considered as the number 2 corner at this point in time, trying to win that competition between himself, DJ Turner, and the young defensive back Josh Newton, who had an interception in his first preseason game over the weekend, so making a name for himself right away in that competition. But ideally, it's not what you want to see, right? Converting other players to being, a defensive back. It is pretty much a similar position, but there are little nuances and little details that do make a world of difference when you're lining up, how you orientate yourself, and just how you cover someone one-on-one, where safeties don't often have to do that. And that's the number 2 defensive back. Obviously, who's going to be the number 1? It's probably going to be their third-year corner, Cam Taylor-Britt. He should be the number 1 or is best suited to win the starting corner job at this point in time. So it's really who's going to be that number 2, because at slot corner, they have Mike Hilton. He's been very, very good for them since he signed with them after the Pittsburgh Steelers let him go a while back now in free agency. So they got the slot locked down. I did like how they brought in Geno Stone at the safety position, signing him from the Baltimore Ravens. But the defensive backs and the other person that's going to play alongside Geno Stone is going to be important to figure out, again, because it is a passing league now. A lot of emphasis goes to that side of the ball. You have a lot of good quarterbacks in your division already, so to figure that out is going to be pivotal, especially coming off of a season where the Bengals were 28th in the NFL last year in passing yards allowed per game, allowing about 248 yards per game to opposing passing offenses. So figuring this out is going to be a major part of it. I'm interested to see who wins that job and how, it develops over the year. If it does show improvement, or do they try to make a move throughout the regular season to improve it if it shows no development going forward. But that's the Cincinnati Bengals. Next, we have the Cleveland Browns to talk about. It's one of the things I've been talking about mostly with the Browns is, can they get Deshaun Watson back to his best form now after 2 years of dealing with a injury. I kind of want to say injury prone, but it hasn't really carried on through the entirety of his career. It's only really been when he's been here with the Cleveland Browns. He's dealt with a lot of injuries over his first 2 years, and because of that, he's sort of put up these pedestrian numbers in his time here in Cleveland. You look at it over the last 2 years, 12 games played, 2,217 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Isn't gonna validate those $230 million you have guaranteed in your contract. And also, it's not only just about the money, it's a huge, factor in all of this with how much the Browns have really invested into going out and trading for Deshaun Watson. You also consider how much draft capital they gave up in a bidding war between pretty much them and the Atlanta Falcons, and just how highly sought after Deshaun Watson was, for a good reason, because of how well he played in Houston and that standard that he set for himself in Houston. You're still waiting to see that here in Cleveland. And again, you add what they gave up for him and how much money they paid him. Not to say that he's running out of time already, because their general manager, Andrew Berry, head coach Kevin Stefanski have been very supportive of him up until this point, understanding that he has gone through injuries. And, there is an adjustment period, of course, with joining a new team. But now, after this third year, if nothing really has changed, or hopefully he doesn't get injured again, but if he does, I think that now becomes a pattern, right? That's 3 straight years if he's gotten hurt, or he's just not shown you what you paid or what you gave up to and go and get him. Then this support, the support that he might have from the fans still, could turn a little sour, and that's the least likely thing you want to happen in this situation. And also because the Cleveland Browns team has a good team overall. They've built a very good roster, a competitive roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball with Zadarius Smith, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. A very good defense, arguably one of the best last year. And also on offense, you have Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper. Their offensive line is very good and a very solid unit as well. You don't want the quarterback to be the main issue, obviously, because of, one, who Deshaun Watson is, and also because it's pretty evident, obviously, when the quarterback's not playing well. Everybody else is looking, pretty decent, like they're all doing their job, and it makes it super clear when the quarterback makes a bad throw or a bad read and it's just not clicking. It's very obvious. So because of that, I feel right now it's a big year for Deshaun Watson heading into his third year now. And it also doesn't help that Joe Flacco comes in off of his couch and puts up the crazy numbers with this roster. And Deshaun, is still struggling to get it going here. Again, the injuries are a big factor of it, but you don't want the injuries to start becoming, a habit, a routine thing to happen each and every year, that you're just going to have to deal with bringing in backups year in and year out, because, again, that's not what you paid for. So this year, big year for Deshaun. He's got the talent there. I can't just think that he's not going to, that talent's just gone all of a sudden, but putting it all together is a lot harder than it seems, and hopefully he gets that figured out this year for the Cleveland Browns' sake especially. Then the second to last team we'll talk about, similar to the Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens. How will the defensive losses be addressed? How are they planning to mask some of the biggest, departures that they had this year? I was between this and having it be a question about their offensive line, because they did lose 3 starters on that offensive line, but I went with the defense just because they did lose some pretty heavy hitters. I mentioned Geno Stone signing with the Bengals, but in the other order, the Baltimore Ravens lost a very good player. He accounted for 7 interceptions just himself last year, 44 solo tackles, and 68 total tackles for what he contributed to this entire unit. One of the most underrated players on their entire team, I would say, for the impact that he had. The 7 interceptions are huge. I don't know exactly for sure if he led the league, but 7's a lot. I mean, he'd probably be right there with Deron Bland. He might have had some more, but it's still right up there. And takeaways don't just happen just like that, just because you're lucky. That it goes a lot into having that amount of interceptions in a year. So it's good for the Bengals, but the Ravens having to deal with that is something of my concern. Also, they moved on from Jadeveon Clowney, and people might think, he's a little bit older, washed up, not what you'd expect out of Jadeveon Clowney maybe during his Houston Texans days, but he was second on this team with 9.5 sacks, so a pretty big contributor right away. They were able to keep Justin Madubuike, who led the team in sacks, but Jadeveon was right there with him, close to I think he had 11 or 12 sacks, Madubuike did, so 9.5 is right there, considering that everybody around them couldn't put up close to those numbers. Losing a guy like that hurts as well. And the biggest one for me, Patrick Queen, going, not only leaving their team, but going and signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers is huge. Great for the Steelers, but you break up one of the better linebacking duos in the entire NFL. They still have Roquan, who I think for a lot of teams and who they have at linebacker probably accounts for both the linebackers that they have in terms of talent. But, you know, to have both of them there was almost like a cheat code. The middle of the field, the sidelines were ever hardly attacked by opposing teams because they knew that one of these guys or both of these guys were going to shut that down right away. Now, Roquan could do a very good job. He's probably arguably up there with being the best linebacker in the game with Fred Warner, but having both of them, again, is huge, and now having to work around that. A guy like Trey Simpson, I want to say is the name, if I'm remembering it correctly, now has to step in there, and you're not probably going to get the same outcome, the same results as with a Patrick Queen, but you hope to get at least a little bit something close to what you got. And now with three of those guys gone, each at every level of defense, it's a little bit weary for me to have the same amount of confidence in this Ravens defense, especially that I had a year ago, because last year they were just stockpiled, and now they're a little bit closer to average than most. Again, still great players on that team, Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Hamilton, and Roquan, but you know, they did lose some pieces, and now I'm interested in seeing how they try and address those losses this year. And lastly, one of the more obvious ones, the Steelers as being the last team, but also a clear question, how will they address the quarterback position? I didn't change the question on the screen, so apologies for that, but it is just the quarterback position. This one was an obvious one. The who's going to win the quarterback battle and where does it stand right now? You know, Justin Fields has been impressing everyone in camp. In the actual game in preseason against the Houston Texans, it didn't look as clean as a lot of people would have hoped, a lot of Steelers fans would have hoped, but you know, the fumbled snaps, it's on both of those players, but overall, if you just erase them, and it's hard to do that, obviously, because those are big plays. I thought Justin did all right. Really, when I was watching that game, I was more so looking at how the entire offense looked, because it was going to be a major change going from Matt Canada to Arthur Smith, and I was pleasantly surprised and pleased with what I saw in some of the throws that Justin made, some of the plays that they were able to get through, execute, I should say, also. And the running game looked pretty solid with both of those guys. The offensive line looked pretty well, other than their first-round selection, Troy Fautanu, getting hurt and kind of getting schooled by Danielle Hunter. It looked pretty decent for being the first game out there in preseason. Now, the two fumbles are going to be a question that everyone's going to kill Justin Fields for, but I didn't put too much stock into that. Now you still have Russell Wilson to come back. He's been getting more and more involved in training camp. He is slated to participate in the second preseason game against the Buffalo Bills, but it still remains a question who's actually going to start, and I think that'll say a lot on who starts with that first-team offense, if it's still Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, if he just gets thrown right away into that starting role. It'll be interesting to see, again, because Fields brings the athleticism. He's had a good connection with George Pickens, but obviously Russell brings the security, the experience, and everything like that. How the next two preseason games go, I'm pretty sure both of them are going to play in the next two unless they decide who the starter's going to be and sit him for the last game. It's going to tell a lot. So these next preseason games are going to be huge for this team in deciding who that starting quarterback is going to be in Week 1, traveling down to Atlanta to face the Falcons in Week 1. But though that makes it all of the teams in the AFC North. We have gone through all that division and try to address some of their biggest questions. You know, there is some pretty fascinating ones that will develop at the start of this year, but also as the regular season goes on, which will be super fascinating to keep track of. But that's pretty much it for that segment. Once we return from our next break, we're going to go into analyzing Trey Lance's performance in his first action since 2022, in his first preseason game against the Los Angeles Rams. We're going to talk about it, what he said about his performance, and what Mike McCarthy also said, plus talking about what Jerod Mayo, the head coach of the New England Patriots, also said on addressing Brandon Aiyuk not deciding to go there, and trade or sign with them, over this offseason. He addresses it and just his bold claim to this New England Patriots team going forward after the developments of this offseason. Those two topics and more coming up on today's show. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back now on the show to talk about some on-the-field issues going on with the Dallas Cowboys instead of focusing solely on what's going on off the field with the contract negotiations and what Jerry Jones says, what Dak says, and everything like that. We'll talk about Trey Lance finally back into some NFL action over this weekend, playing for the first time in a long time since 2022 in his first game action in over a year and a half now. And with that, he did play for the Dallas Cowboys, obviously for the first time, because last year he was traded here to Dallas, but it was after the preseason, so it was a pretty weird trade to just happen out of nowhere to kind of have him there as a security of some sorts there in that quarterback room to potentially give him a chance further down the line. And now we kind of got to see him here in the offseason, see where he's at, see if there was any major developments over this, long hiatus that he has been on not playing. He is entering the fourth year in the NFL now for himself and has gone a full offseason now, finally, to learn this offense, try to integrate himself into the concepts, into what Mike McCarthy wants to see in his offense. So that really has helped him, I think, over this offseason to get a better understanding of what he's supposed to do out there. And now a big test of that to see where he's at in his development is the preseason. Obviously, he played in the game over the weekend against the Los Angeles Rams. Besides the results, because they don't really matter in the preseason, he got the majority of the reps in that first game. Cooper Rush did start, but like I said, Trey Lance got the majority of the playing time in that game because head coach Mike McCarthy said that he planned it this way because, Trey Lance just needs to be out there against other opponents to have game-like experience to try and be up to speed as much as he can when and if his name ever gets called to be needed during the regular season. In that game against the Los Angeles Rams, Trey Lance finished with a 25 for 41 performance, 188 yards. He didn't throw any interceptions, but he also didn't throw any touchdowns against the Rams. And, you look at those numbers, completing just above 50% of his passes. He made a lot of plays with his legs as well. So, kind of showing a little bit of everything, but not, in some people's minds, not ideally what you'd want to see out of Trey Lance because, full context, this is a guy that was drafted, top 5 in the NFL draft a while ago now, and he's had to deal with injuries, not starting, obviously, because he was a rookie, and then you get traded here. There's been a lot of circumstances in his path to fully, be developed as a quarterback in the NFL, and now that he gets his first game action in a while, he's only ever started in 8 games in his career, so to get this game experience now, it's huge for him. So I wasn't really expecting him to be, 35 for 41 for 200 yards, a touchdown or something like that. I was not expecting that, and for him to put up these numbers, it didn't really tell me too much as to where Trey Lance is right now, because the first time you're out there, I don't think anybody really should expect too much out of Trey Lance. And Mike McCarthy almost pretty much said the same thing, that he was pleased with what he saw out of Trey Lance, but he also said he's making good progress. He's definitely wired the right way. He's a great athlete, just a lot of work to do, basically, is what Mike McCarthy said. And Trey Lance also was asked about his overall thoughts after the game, and he pretty much also echoed those sentiments from Mike McCarthy, in which he said, I think I left some plays out there for sure across the board from the first quarter to the fourth. We got the 4 extra possessions and we didn't score touchdowns. That's not a good feeling. So, feeling a little bit disappointed, but again, even of how harsh of a critic he might be on himself, in reality, looking at the situation of just how it is all laid out for Trey Lance, he is coming in as the number 3 quarterback in this quarterback room for the Dallas Cowboys. He's the number 3 guy in the depth chart. So, are these numbers anything you would expect less than from a third-string quarterback in the NFL? Probably not. They're probably what you would expect up until this point. The only difference with Trey Lance, and it is a major one, is that he was drafted so high, but not a lot of guys have been put in the situation where Trey Lance got the opportunity to potentially start with the 49ers. He obviously gets hurt. That, throws everything out the window. They miraculously end up with Brock Purdy, and, he takes over that starting job. So now with Trey Lance, you're sort of in an awkward spot where you don't really need him because you have Brock Purdy. So instead of him continuing his development, he gets traded to a whole new different area, a whole new different situation with the Dallas Cowboys, where they already have a starter as well. And now he has to learn everything, get caught up to speed, as well as continuing his rehab to fully be integrated back to anywhere close to the player that he was once he got drafted out of college. And with all that being the case, I looked at Trey Lance as a quarterback where, similar to Josh Allen coming out of college, where it's a very raw talent that you have here at the quarterback position. And did Josh Allen make a ton of mistakes early on? Absolutely. The turnover problem was a huge thing for Josh, but the organization stayed with Josh. They put a lot of faith in him, and they continued to develop him, get him to grow and understand everything that goes into being a quarterback, not just using your athleticism, because at this level, that can only take you so far. It's the same thing similar to Trey Lance, where very athletic, still has to develop those mechanics, reading zones, figuring out what coverage the opposing defense is in, everything like that. All that just comes with reps, and he hasn't had that over the last, couple of years here, plus trying to learn a whole new system. It's going to be extremely challenging also. So for my just reactions to the takeaways that I took away from this preseason game for just Trey Lance in general, it's the first time out there. I didn't really have too much expectations for Trey Lance in his first game. I knew it was going to be rough. I knew it wasn't going to be something to write home about. He was basically like a rookie, pretty much, heading out there for his first preseason game up until this point, with how much time that he's missed. So, did I expect any of the rookies to, put up the numbers that they did? That's why I was so impressed yesterday in talking about it, how, Jaden, Caleb, JJ all looked very polished, pretty under control, and very much looked the part as rookie quarterbacks coming in and being eventually the faces of their franchise. That's why I was so surprised, because I don't think it's really to be expected or honestly fair in some instances to think that these quarterbacks are just going to come in and, turn and just go lights out and play a great game right away in the NFL. I didn't expect that from Trey Lance, and again, he's not going to be the starter, so there's not that pressure from a lot of people to look at Trey Lance and think, well, he's eventually going to start, so this looks awful if he's eventually going to start. He's the third-string quarterback on the Dallas Cowboys, and at one point in time, I know I talked about, giving Trey Lance an opportunity to potentially try something out here with the Dallas Cowboys if you couldn't figure out anything with Dak, but it looks like right now they're looking a bit more comfortable with Cooper Rush as a potential hypothetical replacement for Dak Prescott if they can't figure out an extension with him. Plus also, if they do get that extension done, they're not going to be thinking about Trey Lance in any sort of remote fashion if they agree to a 3-year deal with Dak Prescott, paying him a ton of money. Trey Lance and this experiment that they have with him is going to go out the door. So really, the Cowboys and any sort of pressure that Trey might have been feeling compared to other rookie quarterbacks wasn't going to be there. The expectations and the pressure for Trey to go out there and perform were really just coming from him overall, just wanting to go out there and prove himself, trying to make this team, honestly, because he is in the last year of his rookie contract, and the Cowboys have really nothing to lose because it looks like they're just going to stick with Cooper Rush at the end of the day to be a replacement for Dak if that becomes the situation, or they're just going to keep Dak, and Trey Lance is really not in a situation here where he could fit in or potentially start with the Dallas Cowboys in the near future. So it's really just up to him to go out there, learn from this, and take it into the next preseason game, because I'm sure he's going to play a lot in that game as well, to try and improve and at least earn himself a spot on this roster. And maybe, who knows, somewhere down the line something happens, something falls in his lap, or he just finds another situation where another team is interested in him. This time right now to kind of get back into the flow of things is going to go a long way. And again, what did he go? 25 for 41? Yeah, he went 25 for 41 for 188. Not awful by any means. Completing almost 50 or just above 50%, almost 200 yards. It is the first preseason game. He definitely wasn't out there against starting level players, but it was all right for the first time. I don't think too many people were watching this expecting Trey to show them something here. There wasn't too many expectations going in, so I didn't think that this was a groundbreaking, disappointing, performance from Trey. It is what you'd expect, honestly, in a third-string quarterback and at a Trey Lance who hasn't played since 2022. So that's pretty much all that I took away from Trey Lance. Now, am I expecting him to perform at this level? Hopefully he gets better in the next game, but again, with the circumstances that he's facing, not too much writing into this going forward for the Cowboys in trying to fit him in anywhere, honestly. So that's where it stands with Trey Lance. Hopefully he improves in this upcoming week's matchup against, I forget who they're playing, but it will be important for him to perform in that game. But regardless of that, we're going to move on to the last two topics I have here. Jerod Mayo talking about being snubbed by Brandon Aiyuk in those trade discussions, and also just giving you guys an injury update after the first week of preseason. Who is on the bench right now trying to nurse an injury? J.J. McCarthy was a big one that happened today. We're going to talk about that. Drew Lock, Malik Neighbors, Marquise Brown, all these guys that are suffering from injuries and how long they're going to be out and the severity of them as well. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We're back here now, no surprise, to talk about some more Brandon Aiyuk news, but not so much just about what's going to happen with him, something related to him that developed a few weeks ago with the New England Patriots, because at one point in time, it looked and it was reported that the Patriots had the best contract offer on the table for Brandon Aiyuk. It was around the ballpark of $30+ million per year as a salary for Aiyuk, and I don't think it was anything that the Browns or the Steelers certainly were going to match. So if it came down to money, the Patriots probably would have ended up signing Brandon Aiyuk and also trading for him with the 49ers, because that's also a major part of this entire situation. But the reports came out, and right away, initially, compared to what the Browns and the Steelers got, it was said that Brandon Aiyuk, rejected that idea of going to the Patriots. He just didn't want to play there. And if you can't agree anything with Aiyuk, this trade was never going to happen. As much as they offered maybe a good package back to the 49ers, this could not have happened without both parties agreeing to that trade. So that was one of the first developments in this entire Aiyuk situation. But looking more in depth at this New England Patriots team and what Jerod Mayo had to say about the situation, and I'll get to that in just a few moments here. But looking at the Patriots and how they're built up, and one of the main reasons that the Patriots, and that it was reported that they gave for deciding to not pursue a trade for Brandon Aiyuk anymore, was that they really wanted to focus on their young receivers and see what they had basically in-house before they made a trade of this magnitude. Because right now, the Patriots are starting from scratch as much as you can apply that term to any team in the NFL, right? You have a new quarterback or new quarterbacks coming in, a new regime just overall in that organization, new general manager, new coach. You finished 4-13 last year, and I think it's for the first time in a long time that they are underdogs in every single game this year. So all those facts, all that information doesn't scream to any free agents or any players that might get traded that they want to go out and play for the Patriots right now. That's just the reality of it, It's not, I don't think it's biased in any way. They're just not a situation, if you compare them to anybody else, that or players just want to go there because they want to play for the Patriots. It's not a situation that, produces too much promise in that way. They do have some exciting players, like Kendrick Bourne, Ramondre Stevenson, KJ Osborne coming in, Antonio Gibson coming in, guys that they are excited about. I've seen a lot of clips from their training camp, and one of their young receivers, Jalen Polk, being a very impressive weapon for them early on in training camp. So, it's exciting right now to build off of these guys that you have, some of these in-house guys that you've drafted and are trying to build a roster that way. But again, if you're trying to reel in some players, experienced players in the NFL, it might not be the situation that they want to walk into right now. And to no surprise, Brandon Aiyuk was no different from that. He turned them down reportedly, even with that contract offer. And, after some time now, their head coach, Jerod Mayo, sort of spoke of this situation. He didn't mention it directly, answering a question of why Brandon Aiyuk decided not to come here. But his message was a short one, and I think it explains pretty much why they took themselves out of it and why, he doesn't really hold too much of a grudge as to why players wouldn't want to come here. He said on the whole situation that when we start to win games, guys will want to come here. When we establish the culture, the roster, the guys will be excited and will want to play here in the near future. So, I think it's a realistic statement from Jerod Mayo. Obviously, being a player there, having some success there with the Patriots, and being there during their times of all the glory, the dynasty there with the New England Patriots, and now being in a completely different situation with this team, now him leading the charge and everything, being a realist with himself and acknowledging the fact that, yeah, we're not in a good position at all. And there's no problem with that right now, because at some point the dynasty wasn't going to continue on forever. They needed somebody to lead this new era of Patriot players, this new team, this new roster that they had going on. And to Jerod Mayo's credit, not a lot of players, not a lot of coaches would have taken this job overall, and for him to do it, and now starting from the absolute bottom and building, like he says, this culture, establishing the roster. Once they have all of that, set in stone, then he acknowledges that it is a process and nothing's going to happen overnight. They need to go out there and prove that they're a good team, and then, sort of advertise themselves as a situation where players look at them and think, I might want to play there. My contract's ending, or I might be looking for a new situation. Why not try out the Patriots? I like what they have going on there. They still have a lot of uncertainties going on at this point in time. They just got finished, cleaning house and establishing the players that they want to have on their team moving forward. And now, considering everything, obviously with this situation with Brandon Aiyuk, yes, it would have been a great situation. No one's going to say that Brandon Aiyuk coming over to their team made them worse. It obviously would have helped this wide receiver room, but I think that transition for Aiyuk, for anybody really, if you go from a team like the Patriots or from the 49ers to the Patriots, it's just a completely different mindset and just a way of attacking a season, knowing that you're most likely not going to win like 7 or 8 games or by any means for the New England Patriots. And coming from the 49ers where you're competing for conference championships, you're competing for Super Bowls, that's a whole different mindset. And also, it obviously would have been great for the Patriots, but I think in the short term, Aiyuk would have led this group, would have been the out-and-out number one receiver in that group, and obviously would have helped with Drake May and his development to have a receiver of that caliber. But in the long-term project of this, my main idea with this entire situation was that the Patriots haven't even gotten to a spot where they haven't even tried anything out yet. We're just getting to the point where you're in the preseason, you're trying out some new things, you're trying out who works, who's going to be a starter, and what your culture, what your scheme, and everything's going to be. They haven't really given themselves the time to even do that yet. So to make a change and bring in Brandon Aiyuk because you think that you need him by some way or form, yes, he would have made you better, but I feel like it was better for the Patriots actually to pull out of this trade and approach it now like, hey, we're not going to be that much better with Brandon Aiyuk on our team anyway. Let's go out there and see what these young receivers can do. Maybe we're surprised by some of them performing or outperforming their expectations. We don't even know if Jacoby Brissett's going to be the quarterback the entire year. Maybe Drake May comes in and then we have to switch everything around. There's a lot of unknowns still with this team, and they haven't had this trial and error period yet where they've had these situations throughout a course of a regular season to try out these new pieces, these new ideas that they want to implement to their new team. It's still very early in the process, so to make a change like this is the kind of move that you make when you know you're like right there on the verge of being, a contender for your division, a contender for your conference. That's why, to me, the Steelers, the Browns, and to some extent the Washington Commanders, for me personally, were in a better situation, were better fits for me for Brandon Aiyuk because they were right there, and I thought Brandon Aiyuk would have wanted to actually go to those teams because, like most players right now, 25, 26 years old, Aiyuk wants to be in a winning situation, and those teams, to me, are closer, obviously, to being actual contenders than the Patriots are at this point in time. And after this season, you're already heading into this season with the mindset that it's not going to be a glorious, very prosperous season. But next year, when you have a better idea of who your starters are, who your go-to guys are, what works for this offense, what doesn't, maybe Drake May is your starter by next season. You don't know. Hopefully you have some results, some good results along the way. But with the most cap in the NFL as well, and going through the trial and errors and learning from the stumbles that you have over the course of this regular season, I think that next year really becomes more important when you can start considering moves like this to bring in more established guys. You establish throughout 2024 what you're all about, what your culture is, what sort of, mantra you want to establish this roster by, what kind of message that Jerod Mayo sends out as the head coach. This is the year to do all that, and then next year, to me, I've been saying it, is the year for the Patriots to make some bigger moves, maybe make a blockbuster move, make a big free agent signing over next offseason's, free agent market. This year, to me, was never going to be a year where they're one move away because it's not going to make them that much better. I thought this was a very smart, a very, educated and mature move to just pull out of this trade and think, we're good. We're going to ride it out, take our lessons, take our hits, and the next year we're going to build off of that and hopefully be better. In a better situation for your players to come in and for the Patriots also to go out and get bigger fish to come and join their team. And that's pretty much where this whole situation, what I took away from the Patriots and them deciding to pull away from the Brandon Aiyuk trade talks. It came to a surprise to a lot of people, but when you really dig into it, I think this is a good decision made by the Patriots going forward. But we'll see how this year plays out. Hopefully they get some good results. Hopefully they get a couple wins here because I like Jerod Mayo. I like what he's all about. I like how he's running the team so far. And hopefully they give him a chance and not have him on too short of a leash going forward. But that's it for the Patriots and talking about them. We have one more topic, just a quick one, to go over some of the injury updates after the first week of preseason, talking about Malik Neighbors, him dealing with an ankle injury, Marquise Brown with a shoulder, Drew Lock also. How long are they going to be out, and how serious are their injuries that they sustained over the course of last week? We'll be right back with those issues after this short break. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, just going over some injuries that have developed over the course of this last week, talking about some pretty important players going forward for some of these teams and how they're dealing with these injuries and what it means for these teams, how long are they going to be out, and things like that. So we're going to start off with the New York Giants, a couple of injuries that they're dealing with after the first preseason game, starting with Drew Lock, who started that game, if I'm not mistaken, and on Thursday, he was hurt in his second series, I want to say. He limped off the field a little bit there. DeVito came in and, took over from there, but Drew Lock, in this opportunity that he has now with the Giants, it was a pretty big moment for him to go out there and, try and win that backup quarterback spot, at least in the New York Giants roster, but he was hurt. He's expected to miss some time with a hip pointer and a strained oblique, sources told ESPN, so he's likely to miss a couple of weeks. The Giants are expected to sign an interim quarterback because they only have Danny Dimes and Tommy DeVito as their only two quarterbacks on their roster right now, so it is unfortunate for Drew Lock, to be out for a couple of weeks, probably missing out on the next preseason games that the Giants have, so that's a bit of a bummer there for Drew Lock. I don't know if it's going to be too big of a shift in terms of the backup quarterback role for the Giants. I think pretty much Daniel Jones is going to be their guy, and I don't know if they have as much confidence in Tommy DeVito to be that backup quarterback up until right now. I feel like Drew Lock really had the edge over him, but it is an opportunity for Tommy to go out there. Unfortunately for Drew Lock, dealing with that hip pointer and a strained oblique, but that's Drew Lock. And then on the other side of it, just on the same side of the ball, Malik Neighbors, a bigger headline, obviously, because it is Malik Neighbors and how much stock has been put into Malik Neighbors already to be this X-Factor game changer for the New York Giants as of right now. Not even really being into his first regular season. He's already, I think, getting most of the attention as to being the go-to guy for the Giants, but on Sunday, he left practice because of a left ankle injury. He did not return during that practice, and it is right now believed to be a minor ankle sprain, which is a big relief for the New York Giants because obviously those ankle injuries are pretty tricky to deal with. You don't really know what the severity of it is or how each guy's going to, recover from it because all of them are a little bit different. So the Giants right now believe that it is a minor ankle sprain, and the practice on Monday, he didn't take part in that, and Brian Daboll said afterward that he was feeling a little sore, on yesterday, actually, I should say. He's day-to-day right now, but it seems like he could be ready to play in that Houston game. I think he said today that he feels no worry about missing that first game at the Minnesota Vikings. So it's not something that it is, going to drag on most likely. I probably don't expect him to play at Haason, which I do believe is their next preseason game. But for the regular season, in terms of potentially missing out on that, I don't think there'll be any worry with that. Malik Neighbors has ruled out the possibility of being out of that game. So if he's feeling all right and the Giants say it's a minor injury, there shouldn't be any worry there. But it was a little bit of a scare there because Malik, again, there's a lot riding on him right away, being one of the best receivers in this year's draft, and now also, no Saquon, and this team is just dying for any sort of excitement. Malik was supposed to be that guy, and dealing with this ankle injury, hopefully it all goes quickly and smoothly for Malik to get back out there as soon as possible. Another injury that was pretty significant over the course of last weekend, where everybody played their preseason games, was on the part of Marquise Brown. He signed a one-year deal this year with the Kansas City Chiefs to be one of their main guys at the receiver position. Obviously last year they didn't have too many go-to guys in that regard. Rashee Rice was probably the best one out of the group, and they didn't expect him to take that big of a leap right away as a rookie. So not only do you have Rashee Rice, but you have Marquise Brown now that you added. You drafted Xavier Worthy, and now this roster overall, this wide receiver room, is looking pretty promising. But unfortunately for Marquise Brown, he suffered a shoulder injury known to be a dislocation of the sternoclavicular shoulder joint. I hope I said that right. In the first game against the Jacksonville Jaguars on Sunday, and it was right away just in that first play. I think it was a slant to Marquise Brown from Patrick Mahomes, and he was tackled and he fell on that left shoulder, and now he got hurt and obviously went to the sideline. It didn't look too promising just from how he was holding it and how they were dealing with it on the sideline. He actually had to go to the hospital during that game or after that play, but he was cleared to leave on Sunday, which is a great sign, obviously, and it was announced just today. But in the moment, head coach Andy Reid mentioned that this was actually the same injury that Tyreek Hill suffered in 2019. And when Tyreek suffered that injury back then, he missed 4 weeks. And the first game of the week, or first game of the season for the Kansas City Chiefs, they're obviously playing in the opening match on Thursday against the Baltimore Ravens. That matchup is just about under a month away. So it was announced today that Marquise Brown is expected to miss, like Tyreek was, about 4 to 6 weeks to fully recover from this shoulder injury. And, it puts him there right on the brink of potentially missing the game. I don't know if they're going to rush him back or anything like that, or maybe he recovers from it a lot sooner, but it's pushing right up there against that first week deadline, and it could unfortunately mean that Marquise Brown could be out of that first game, a big one against the Baltimore Ravens in Kansas City. So not too great a news for the Chiefs from that regard. And similarly, another injury that I wanted to get to is just Nate Wiggins, the first-round selection for the Baltimore Ravens, their defensive back. He also injured his shoulder on Friday's game, but the MRI revealed that it's just a minor shoulder sprain, so he's also considered day-to-day. He should be ready by the first game, but I could see him potentially playing in the last preseason game because the Ravens do seem pretty optimistic that he did dodge a bullet there and he should be all right over the next few days. And obviously now, to get to the biggest one, probably J.J. McCarthy, diagnosed today, I want to say, or late Monday evening with a torn meniscus. And it's unfortunate, it really is, for J.J. McCarthy, just because I mentioned just yesterday in my episode that went out during the evening time almost, and then the news broke, even later than that, that J.J. McCarthy suffered from this knee injury. He described it as just being a little bit sore. He was dealing with some knee soreness, but over the course of, the first preseason game and now getting back to practice, they looked at it a little bit more in depth. They had an MRI on it, and it did reveal that he did tear his meniscus, and now it was announced that the Vikings and McCarthy agreed that he will go through knee surgery, unfortunately, and depending on what the severity and what the method is to try and treat this torn meniscus, it will determine how long J.J. McCarthy will be out for. The surgery already is going to have him out probably at the least, worst case scenario, is going to have him out for about a couple of weeks. But it all depends if they trim the meniscus or if they completely, go in there and restructure it and have to, reattach it essentially in, the surgery room, and when they decide to make that decision once the surgery does start. So it really just comes down between those two things. And again, it is unfortunate because we don't have a timetable. Once they make that decision, it's going to become a lot clearer. But if he is forced to miss a lot of time, I would feel pretty bad for him just because he had such a great start in that first preseason game. Maybe, getting the idea that he could challenge Sam Darnold for that starting quarterback spot. But now pretty much it does mean that Sam's going to be the starter. And it is unfortunate because I think JJ was surprising a lot of people this offseason in not only the combine, but the meetings and everything like that, getting drafted to essentially the perfect situation and having a great start in the preseason. Now to have this happen to him, it is unfortunate, and I don't like seeing it happen, but hopefully he makes a speedy recovery. But to not end this last segment on a negative note, there are some returns from injuries that I thought were pretty significant. Starting with the Miami Dolphins, they took off Jalen Phillips, their young and promising pass rusher, off of the physically unable to perform list after 8 months of recovering from that torn Achilles. He is back now at practice for the Miami Dolphins, which is great news. Evan Neal, also the tackle for the New York Giants, was also taking off of the PUP list recently because of an ankle injury he suffered in November. Deshaun Watson is another one. He is fully cleared for full contact going forward, so maybe we see him in one of the next preseason games, hopefully, to get a better feel of where he's at. And the last one that I just saw today also, Arik Armstead was also taking off of the PUP list for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's going to be a major contributor along with Josh Hines-Allen, along with Trayvon Walker, along that defensive line. All three of those guys are going to be pivotal for the Jaguars, so it's great news to have him back off of the PUP list to contribute right away to their practice. And that's pretty much it. Wanting to end this episode on a positive note in regards to injuries and talking about some of the guys that did come back over the course of the last few days. But with that being the case, we are going to wrap up today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show as always, and follow the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the Podcast Network channel and the Sports Network channel, to give you guys another opportunity to see more NFL content in a lot of different sorts of ways, different sorts of media that you guys are able to see on both YouTube channels. And for the last thing I wanted to say, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL storylines and the hottest topics around the league with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't